At 6:44 inches the morning, on the 22nd of May 1968, 99 men were alive inside a steel tube in the Atlantic Ocean. There was no distress call, no explosion recorded at the surface. No bodies, no smoke signal on the water. They simply vanished. When they were found, 5 months later, 3 kilometers beneath the surface, scientists calculated what had happened to them in that final moment. The pressure hull, the only wall between 99 men and 4,400 pounds per square inch of pressure, had collapsed in less than 1/10 of a second. The USS Scorpion was a skipjack-class nuclear submarine, 252 feet long, powered by a nuclear reactor capable of driving it at over 30 knots underwater speeds that in 1968 were impossible for any conventional submarine. It was, in every sense, a masterpiece of Cold War engineering. The crew had an average age of 27. These were men who had spent weeks at sea and were heading home. The Scorpion had been operating in the Mediterranean and was bound for Norfolk, Virginia. Christmas was coming. Some had already promised vacations. Commander Francis Slattery was one of the most respected officers in the Navy. Methodical, precise, the kind of man who left nothing to chance. On May 21st, the Scorpion sent its last position transmission. It was 400 miles southwest of the Azores, in the open Atlantic. Everything in order, no anomalies reported. That was the last message any person on Earth received from 99 men. On May 27th, the USS Scorpion was declared presumed lost. The Navy organized the most extensive search operation in its history up to that point. They found nothing. The crew's wives waited days in Norfolk before being notified. Some found out through the radio. To understand what happened to the Scorpion, you first have to understand where a nuclear submarine exists. Not in the water, in the pressure. At sea level, atmospheric pressure is 14.7 pounds per square inch. That's what you're bearing right now, as you listen to this, without even noticing it. At 100 meters depth, that pressure multiplies by 10. At 300 meters, by 30. The USS Scorpion was designed to operate at a maximum depth of approximately 300 meters. Its pressure hull, built from high-strength steel nearly 3 centimeters thick, could withstand that. What it could not withstand was 3 kilometers. That is the pressure at which the Scorpion rests today. 4,400 pounds per square inch. 300 atmospheres, enough to crush most unspecialized vehicles instantly. But the question the Navy needed to answer wasn't what had happened when the Scorpion reached the bottom. The question was why it had reached the bottom. And this is where the story gets darker. The USS Scorpion was carrying Mark 37 torpedoes. High-precision weapons equipped with high-energy density batteries that, under certain conditions, could overheat. The theory most accepted today among military researchers is this. One of the Scorpion's torpedoes began operating autonomously inside its tube. In naval language, a hot run. The motor activated without a launch order. The standard protocol when this occurred was straightforward. Open the outer tube door, flood the compartment, and the water pressure would stop the torpedo. Emergency procedure, known, practiced. But at that moment, the Scorpion was in motion. And the torpedo it carried inside, depending on the exact model and circumstances, may have had the range and capability to track a noise source. Meaning, the torpedo that was launched or that escaped from the tube may have turned around. The acoustic records from SOSUS, a secret Navy hydrophone system installed on the floor of the Atlantic to detect Soviet submarines, captured a series of sounds on the 22nd of May 1968. First, a sound consistent with a torpedo explosion. Then, seconds later, the unmistakable sound of a pressure hull giving way. The 99 men of the USS Scorpion were alive until that first impact. After the impact, the Scorpion began to sink. Not in free fall. Submarines don't drop like a stone. They sink in a spiral, the engine still turning, systems still active, with possibly men still alive. Nobody knows how long it took to reach the bottom. Minutes, probably. What physicists know with certainty is what happened the moment the Scorpion crossed its crush depth. High-strength steel has a limit. That limit exists at a specific depth where the external pressure exceeds the structural capacity of the material. Engineers call it crush depth. When that line is crossed, there is no warning, no slow deformation, no time. The hull collapses inward at the speed of sound through metal. In 0.1 seconds, 1/10 of a second, the interior of the submarine, which had measured 3 meters in diameter, becomes almost nothing. Scientists who study this phenomenon use the word implosion, but that word makes it sound abstract. Controlled. What actually happens is this. Water enters at thousands of meters per second. The temperature inside rises several hundred degrees in the moment of collapse from the adiabatic compression of the air. And all of it happens before a nerve signal can travel from skin to brain. There was no suffering in that final instant, but there were 99 men who didn't know what was coming. 5 months after the disappearance, the USNS Mizar, a Navy oceanographic research vessel, found the remains of the USS Scorpion at 9,800 feet of depth, 400 miles southwest of the Azores. The images sent back by exploration submersibles showed 2 main sections. The stern, where the nuclear reactor and propulsion section were, was relatively intact. The reactor had not collapsed. The bow, where most of the crew lived and worked, was destroyed. The Navy organized an official investigation. It classified most of the findings. The public conclusion was brief: cause undetermined. The families never received a definitive answer. Barbara Foley lost her husband. Gerald Foley was 27 years old. Patricia Slattery lost her husband. Commander Francis Slattery was 39. For decades, former Navy members and investigative journalists have pointed to an additional possibility that the official investigation never completely ruled out: that a Soviet submarine operating in the area may have played a role in the sinking. In 1968, the Cold War was at its peak. The nuclear submarines of both superpowers constantly stalked each other in silence beneath the Atlantic. A too-close encounter. An accident, deliberate or not? The Navy never confirmed this theory, nor did it rule it out. The USS Scorpion is still there, at 9,800 feet of depth, in the Atlantic. The nuclear reactor is still inside. The Navy monitors it periodically for radiation leaks. No significant leak has been recorded. In 1993, a congressional committee reviewed some of the declassified evidence. It reached no definitive conclusion about the cause. In 2012, a researcher named Ed Offley published Scorpion Down, the most exhaustive analysis of the disappearance conducted to date. His conclusion: the hot torpedo theory was the most probable, but the possibility of an encounter with a Soviet submarine could not be ruled out. Today, if you approach the shores of Norfolk, Virginia, there is a memorial, a plaque with 99 names. None of them knew why. None of them had time to ask.